So one of the ways you can go about tackling a 3D text effect doesn't even actually involve 3D tools right off the bat. You can, in theory, keep it pretty simple and still get the visual effect that you're looking for. So I'm going to, rather than opening up my preset at 8.5 by 11, which is going to give me a portrait or vertical page, I'd like it to be horizontal or long or landscape. So I'm just going to reverse my settings. You can always undo this. So this is actually, same paper layout, it's just tilted. You can do this even if you open your document right off the bat, and if you change your mind, you can always go to image rotation, and tilt it. So both ways. Now the idea that I've got, I want to think of something gooey like someone threw a water balloon at a brick wall, but it wasn't water, it was something sticky and slimy and kind of gross. So I'm going to first find a reference image that I can work from. So I'm going to look for like brick wall, we'll say. And I'll go to images, and because this is going to act as my background, I want to make sure that it is as clean and large and pretty of an image as possible. So I'm going to go to my search tools and make sure that I select large, and this will give me only the biggest, prettiest possible images that are out there. So I like this one. I like the color that's going on down here. Kind of makes me think of the slime that I'm going to add. So I'm going to click on it. Let me back up so I can show you what I did. Click View Image, and then you see how my icon has a little magnifying glass shape. If you see that, that means the image can get bigger. Click that. That's going to give you the biggest, prettiest possible image that you can download. So then save it. I'm going to save it as, and maybe throw it on my desktop. Then go to File, Place, check my desktop. There we go. Now it doesn't quite fit, that's fine. I'm going to hold down the Shift and the Alt key at the same time and drag it out so that I don't have any more white space around the edges. There we go. So now I've got my wall, I've got my backdrop. Now I'm prepared to make changes to it in order to get the visual effect that I'm looking for. So I'm going to do this with my pen tool. But first, I want to get sort of a template that I can work with. I want to see what the text is going to look like so I can easily trace it. So I'm going to use my text tool. I'm going to type out a word. I'll use slime or goo. I like goo, it's short. And I'm going to make any adjustments that I need to the text. So I might change the size. I think maybe white would be a little easier for me to see. And if I wanted to kind of mess with it more, I can, but this is a fine starting point. The text isn't going to show, I'm going to trace it using my pen tool. So it's just there to give me some guidance on what it needs to look like. Alright, so I've grabbed my pen tool. I don't want to just make a path. I want to make a shape that has a color set to it. So, I don't know, when I think slime, I think Slimer from Ghostbusters, and he's like this ridiculous neon green color. So I'm going to go with that. And I'm going to start by tracing the shape of the G. And I don't have to be exact. Remember, this is gonna, goo, I want it to look kind of drippy and nasty, so I'll lower the opacity a little so I can see the G in it. I'll make it a little more bubbly. Okay, I'll raise the opacity again. Alright, so that's my G. And I want it to look really drippy and gross and kind of disgusting, gooey. I want it to look gooey. That's my vision. That's the idea that I've got going on. So what I can do at this point is I can alter the little bits of the edges of the goo. Maybe I'll add in drips, perhaps. I'll make the G look like it's really starting to kind of go. Perhaps I will add in some points. Just sort of like it's starting to deteriorate. It's like bleh. You can see it's starting to look a little not quite like the original G. That's okay though, because remember, you're trying to illustrate the purpose, what is the idea that you've got behind you. You want it to look really close to the word that you've picked. So if that means you need to distort it a little bit, that's totally okay. I want it to look like it's trying to melt away. That's my visual goal. Alright, so I've got that G. I'll go ahead and name it G. And I'll hide my text for right now just so that I can see it on the wall. Now, one of the nice things about layers, and you may have found this on accident already, is if you double click on a layer, you get all these layer style options. And I'm going to use a bunch of these to help make this appear three-dimensional. Now I'm going to look at the overall image. It's pretty well lit. I'm going to guess the lighting's probably coming from above. Yeah, if I look at the bricks, I can see there's a little shadow beneath it, which means the light's coming above and casting that shadow. So I'm going to use that to help me figure out what the shading on the G needs to be. So I'm going to check bevel and emboss, and what this does is it helps you kind of make that goo pop out. Now right now it's set to inner bevel because it's going to give dimension to that. And then this little guy down here, shading, this tells you where the light source is coming from. So you can actually move that little mark and control where the shadows go. You can control, there we go, how much and how soft it's going to look. I want it to look really kind of like slimy and disgusting. Let's see, highlight mode. So now I can, again, this is just like the blending modes of your layers. So you can actually get all kinds of different effects visually depending on what it is you're looking for. Gloss contour, oops. You can either click on it and hand edit it. This will help it look glossier or more shadowed based on the edits that you make to it. So I want it to look slimy. And you can put as many points on this little shape as you like. You can also, there are presets. So you could poke around through here and determine what's going to work out best for what you're looking for. Alright, I'm relatively satisfied with that one. So I'll say okay. Gives you a preview of the curve you made. Shows off some shadows. Contour lets you deal with like those outer edges a little bit more. I don't really care for that. You can also apply a texture. I don't really want a texture to my slime. I want it to be smooth and slimy. Let's see what contour has to offer. Ooh. Now these, if you're doing a shape that's maybe metallic, maybe you pick something that's metal like gold or silver or bronze, or maybe just the word metallic, some of these, by combining the two, actually that looks pretty convincingly shiny. I like that. By combining the bevel and emboss itself as well as the contour, that can actually really amplify how shiny something may actually be. And I'm also going to add a drop shadow, which is going to make it look as though it's physically like stuck to the wall. This doesn't always work if you're, putting a person into an environment, because it's going to look like they're standing right next to a wall no matter what the backdrop is. But it works out very well in this case because it is right against the wall. So I'm going to try and mimic the shadows that are happening under the bricks with the shape that I've made here. Distance pertains to how far away it is from the object. So, now it looks like it's when it's far away like this, it looks like it's kind of hovering off the wall, like floating in front of it. But I want it to look like it's stuck to the wall. Spread helps it spread out a little bit. I'm going to leave that pretty low. Size makes it bigger and softer. So you're going to kind of tinker with all of these till you can get an effect that you're looking for. You could even leave spread pretty low, but I'm just looking for something similar to what's happening with the shadows on the bricks. The rest of these affect glow effects, whether you want to stroke around the outside of that shape that you've made, putting patterns over it, gradients over it, different colors. But I like what I've got going on here. It's looking pretty nasty. I might play with some of the adjustment layers. Ooh, that makes it look like it's liquid goo, which is kind of cool. So I'll play with some of these effects and just see visually if I like anything. If you're on a PC and you want to scroll through these, you can actually just click on it so it's highlighted in blue. You see how there's a faint blue outline around it, and you can use your arrow keys to jump through all of those different adjustments to see what you've got going on, as far as, you know, rather than clicking and selecting each and every one of them. So I often do this. I kind of like the clear goo, I'll be totally honest. Looks like soft light. Subtract makes it a red goo. You can really see the color and the shine that's applied there. I like that. I might go a little darker, maybe try to match the color down here, like it's a part of it. Let's see what a darker green does. I like the lime, maybe. Grab the eyedropper tool and pick a green. Add them to my swatches. I'll call it brick green. And now, if I try to change the color of my swatches down here, there we go. There we go, that's pretty close. I like the shine. Alright, so I could go a step further. Maybe I want it to look like he's dripping goo. He's not just a shape of goo, but he's also going to be kind of, you know, goo's going to be dripping off everything. So now I could add to it. Let me grab my paintbrush tool, create a new layer. I'll call it my G. Now I'm going to grab a hard-edged brush and I'm going to paint drips over. And I know that, you know, you can't really tell what we've got going on here because it's, you know, we're painting directly on, we're not working on the G because it's a path layer, but that's okay. I'm just gonna add extra little nasty bits to it. Make it look really gross. Okay, so we'll say I'm good with my add-ons. So now I've got these separate. One of the other nice things is I can right-click on the layer of the G and copy its styles, meaning anything that's been applied to this in terms of the effects. And then I can come up to this one, right-click, paste style. Oh. So that did everything. That did the blending mode and all of the layer effects. Now I'm not totally convinced that I've picked the exact same color. Add in a color overlay. Obviously red is not the one I'm wanting. And maybe pick the right color just to make sure it applies. Oop, but it doesn't. Completely ignores the color panel. So I'm going to turn that off and ignore it. And instead, I'll select each one of my drippy, gross things that I've made. Grab my brush, make sure I've got the right color selected, and paint over them just to make sure that it matches. It's a little closer. So now, alright, I've got what I think I'm looking for, but I want it to blend in a little bit more. You've got shapes on top of shapes, and it looks kind of artificial. No sweat. Throw a mask in. And in this case, I'll want a soft-edged brush to make them blend. And you see how the effects sort of adjust based on how you change its shape. Even though it's a mask, even though it's not permanent, it lets you feather those edges, and it adjusts the highlights and the shadows as you're working. And if I wanted to move certain drips, I would just have to select it. Oops, but I want to make sure that I'm moving the drip itself. There we go. Not the mask. If I click on this area and make a selection and move it, it's moving the mask and the drip. So I might want to relocate some of these little guys just to make sure that they're doing what I expect them to. But it's looking pretty darn nasty, huh? Pretty gross. Turn my goo back on. One of the other nice things, I'm going to lower the opacity of this so I can see my goo a little easier. If I wanted to do this without the pen tool and just freehand it, I can do that. I just need to make sure that I do so on the correct layer. I'd probably want to make a new layer. I'll put both of my O's on it. I'll go ahead right off the bat, copy the layer style, and paste it. That way I can make sure that both of my O's are not identical, because that doesn't always look right. And you see how the three-dimensional elements of it automatically apply? Kind of gross, huh? That color still doesn't match. I meant to say slime, but lime kind of works too. There we go. What I did instead of painting it is I just grabbed the paint bucket tool and then dumped that green in. And I think I'm going to do the same thing just because my drips don't quite match either. Make a selection. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Make sure everybody matches. Just because it really visually makes a difference whether or not things are kind of working together. There we go. Come back over here. Do more. Oh, and make this one kind of lopsided, like it's melting off the bricks. That'll look gross. Goo. So yeah, part of the fun is you can actually, you don't even need to use the pen tool. This could all just be done using the paintbrush tool, as long as you understand how the tool works, and you can make sure it blends into the backdrop as best as it can. Turn my glue text off. It's pretty nasty. So that's one way that you could do it. If I wanted to go a step further, I could maybe throw a puddle down here. Like it was dripping off the wall. I would probably want to do a little bit more, a little slightly different adjustments to some of this, just to make sure that it doesn't, it doesn't look too artificial. The color's changing a little bit. Maybe the shadows would lay a little bit differently. So I could always double click on the effects and then, add some changes to the way that the shadows appear. Maybe drop shadows a little less far away. And remember, you're using the paintbrush, so you can use any of these textures that you like. So maybe if it's dripping, make a bigger brush. There we go. Maybe if it's dripping, it's adding little bits of splat. Oh, I've got some splatter brushes. There we go. I've downloaded some additional brushes, so I've got a few things that might kind of help it look as though it's been splattered. And if it's looking a little too, like some of these spots are looking very round, and remember, if you think of perspective, thinking back to our first project, the ground is coming towards us. So if I wanted to, I could actually put a few big splats in but then free transform it and maybe help it look as though it's kind of perspective is being affected. There we go. It's a little more convincing, I think. So that's probably one of the simpler ways of going about finding a word or a texture and applying it. Now, obviously, this doesn't apply to everything. You wouldn't want to treat every single situation in this way. Not everything's going to look gooey or slimy or wet or, in some cases metallic. But there are other ways to tackle that also. Let me go into that next. Another way that you can go about getting the end product that I think you're looking for in terms of, whatever word you select is by downloading a specialized Photoshop brush. You can download many free Photoshop brushes online just by typing in free and then whatever type of description you're looking for and then Photoshop brush. So this includes cracks, this includes like smoke effects. Some are better than others, but I'm thinking, the image that I've got going on right now is like a fancy cat bed. So I'm thinking fur or fuzz or something kind of along those lines. So I'm going to type out the word fur. And it's still in the lime green. That's okay. I'm going to place it where I'd like it because I'm going to end up painting over it using a furry or fuzzy textured brush. Just to make sure that I can see all the texture, I might come into my character panel. That's also available if you go to Window, Character. And I want to put some space between my letters just to make sure that they've got enough, workable space for texture purposes. That's the tracking section. So if you're new to using text, play with some of these. You'll get different effects with your text, and it can really help with this type of thing. Alright, so I looked up a free Photoshop brush, and I want to see what these look like, so I'm going to click on images. I'm not downloading the images, I just want to see visually what they end up looking like when it's been used. So some of these look pretty convincing. So if I wanted to download these brushes, I'd click Visit Page. It's going to take me to the web page that they came from. Oh, and it gives me a whole bunch of different options. Ooh, this one's nice and fuzzy too. Again, some are going to be better than others. If you look at this one, it looks a little less, you'd have to do a lot of layering to get the end result that you're looking for. This one looks like a little cotton ball poof. So, let's see, fur or grass. So find something that you think will work. I'm going to try this one. Click download source in this case. Every website's going to be different, and as always, be careful where you're at. DeviantArt's a good site for people sharing brushes like this, so that looks good. So I'm going to click download. Oh, there we go. It'll usually be in either a zip or a RAR file, so you know, depending on your site, you might want to download software that can open that type of file. I use I use 7-Zip, which is really great. It does many different types of archive files, and it's free. There we go. And it will give you an ABR file, which is an Adobe brush file. So I'm going to double click it. By double clicking it, it'll open up Photoshop automatically, and if you go to your brush panel any brush that you've downloaded will be at the very end or at the very bottom of the list. So to test it out, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call it Fur. Oh, see? And it's very, very fluffy. Give it a minute to... Holy moly, it's fluffy. It's like a cat tumbleweed. There we go. Usually, not always, but usually it'll have its own shape dynamics set already if someone set it up the way that they like. So now all I have to do is pick a color and pick a size. And you can see it's a little bit crazy, so I might actually want to kind of taper that in a touch just so that I can have more control over what the end product is going to look like. And then I can just literally just trace it. Now if I want it to look like a real cat, oops, it's like I went a little too far with the bottom part of the F. The nice thing is anything that you can turn into a Photoshop brush is also capable of being an eraser. So I can always erase it using the same brush option. And touch it up. Now, this is definitely a good brush that I found. There are many good ones out there, and you can find a lot of resources for free. Again, I just recommend being careful of where you're at. Sometimes, you know, if you're not careful about what kind of website that you're on, it can result in issues. You don't want to get a virus or anything like that. Touch up a little bit over here. Now, right now, do I have furry text? Yes. But if you think about animal fur, you know, it's layers of fur. So I want to actually add a few different layers of different colors. So if I were going to make this, you know, we'll say I'm thinking white cat or white animal of some kind. White usually has a little bit of gray in it as well, just to add a little depth. So I'm actually going to layer in some gray on top. And then I will add more white back on top of that, just to build up the realism. And if you're not sure, I mean, I have a white cat, so I have an idea. If you're not sure, you know, this is a really good example, actually, this particular brush. But if you're not sure, look up a picture. White cat. You can see he's not just all white, he's got little bits of gray in addition to the white to help show what the surface of his body's doing. So this is kind of what I'm wanting to emulate here. Depending on, let's see, depending on lighting, maybe I'd put a little bit more dark gray down near the bottom of each of the shapes to sort of create the appearance of shadow. So perhaps I might go a little darker. Put some white over that, just around the edges, just to get it to blend a little. like a little bit lighter. See, I made my brush a little bit bigger too. You can see some of the fibers are a little longer now. A little goes a long way though, so, you know, don't overdo it. Topics like this, sometimes a lot of layering is involved. So you may have to go over certain areas a couple times before you get the end result that you're looking for. It's not a bad thing, but just kind of keep in mind whatever topic you decide to go with may be more involved than you initially realize. You know, if someone were to give this to me and it was just white text or white fur text with, you know, no depth, I would probably suggest, you know, a little bit more could have been done in order to sort of amp up the realism a little bit, because shading and that sort of thing does play a heavy role in whether or not it looks real. So, you know, this is going to be one of those situations where you need to look up a reference of whatever your object is before you start, because otherwise it's really easy to kind of throw it off. But you can see, if I zoom in and look at just this area, that's looking pretty close. You know, you've got a layer of dark fur to light fur, and the texture on the edges is just fantastic. This is a really good find, this brush. You know, and I didn't just flatten it out. I have light grays and dark grays and white all combined. So now, okay, we've got our furry object. At this point, I need to give it a shadow like it's sitting on the cushion. Now, if I were to go the direction of the last one with the slime and add a drop shadow, that doesn't always cut it. I'm going to show you why. Now I spread it out a little bit. You can see that looks pretty bizarre. But even if I control where the light's coming from, you see how it's giving sort of a halo around the whole thing. Even if I reduce the spread, the shadow is going to be right beneath the object or right beneath the shape, not all the way around it. So this isn't going to be the most realistic option that I can pick. However, this is where a burn and dodge come into play. I'm going to duplicate my backdrop. Rasterize my backdrop. Now I can physically, and I get all the same options, by the way. Now I'm not going to put fur necessarily in the shadow. That's but I can use the brush to just indicate where these furry letters are sitting on the pillow. And the wonderful thing about the burn tool is that it takes the colors that are already on the photo, those blues and grays of that pillow cushion, and just make sure that it's going to sort of match. So it keeps the colors and just darkens them. If I were using Dodge, it would lighten them. If I wanted to go a step further, I could probably add in wrinkles, sort of like, you know, it's weighty, it's heavy on that cushion, and it's causing, you know, some stress on the fabric, so maybe the fabric's wrinkling, like it's a fat cat. If I, you know, do too much, I can always move the fur a little bit to make sure it's sitting where I want it to be. If I wanted to make sure that the fur itself had the right shadows as well, or maybe I don't want to bust out the fur tool again, I can even use Burn and Dodge on the layers that I created. Maybe I do want to, you know, pull out a little bit more gray, a little less white. So now it looks like there's a furry critter spelling the word fur in the bed. Again, really good way to approach this. My next couple lectures are going to cover some of the actual 3D tools that you might have the option to use